The man who walked out with the bulls. There are moments in history when survival makes no sense at all. Moments when witnesses agree on what they saw, but no one can explain how it was possible. One such moment happened in Georgia in the year 1847, on a remote cotton plantation surrounded by pine forests and river fog. It began as an act of cruelty meant to humiliate a man. It ended as a mystery that still refuses to die. When the iron gate of the bull pen opened after 72 hours, everyone expected to see blood. They expected bones. They expected silence. Instead, they saw a man walk out alive, untouched, and calm. Behind him walked 6 full-grown bulls. Not charging, not raging, but following him quietly, like trained animals. Like guardians. That man was named Tobias. And what happened inside that pen would change the fate of everyone on that plantation. To understand how such a thing could happen, we must go back to the man who ordered it. Baron Wilhelm Vandermeer was one of the most powerful landowners in southern Georgia. He arrived in America nearly 20 years earlier from the Netherlands, carrying wealth earned through the spice trade and a reputation that followed him like a shadow. In Europe, people whispered about him. In America, no one asked questions. The South welcomed men like Vandermeer. If you had money, land, and confidence, the past did not matter. Vandermeer bought nearly 3,000 acres of land near Valdosta and turned it into a cotton empire. Hundreds of enslaved people worked his fields. His house stood on a small hill, white columns shining in the sun, overlooking everything he owned. From his second-floor study, Vandermeer could see the fields, the cabins, the barns, and far beyond them, the bull pen. The bulls were his pride. Vandermeer had developed his obsession during his travels in Spain. He admired bullfighting, not for the sport, but for the raw dominance of the animals. Power fascinated him. Violence interested him. Control thrilled him. He imported aggressive bull breeds from Europe. These were not farm animals meant for work. These were beasts bred for fury. The workers called them the devil herd. No one went near them unless ordered. 3 men had already died because of those bulls. The first was Henry, crushed in seconds when a bull named Titan charged him without warning. The second was Peter, dragged against a fence until his arm shattered. The third was Samuel, an experienced handler, killed when a bull struck him so hard his skull broke. After that, the pen was reinforced with iron and thick wood. No one was allowed inside again. The bulls were fed from outside. They lived in isolation, dangerous and restless. Vandermeer liked it that way. The plantation itself was ruled by fear. Vandermeer rarely raised his voice. He did not beat people with his own hands. That work was done by his overseer, Dalton, a cold and efficient man who believed cruelty was simply part of the job. Vandermeer preferred psychological punishment. He enjoyed breaking hope. He promised freedom, then took it away. He made people compete, then changed the rules. He wanted those under him to feel small and uncertain at all times. His wife Marguerite lived in silence. She stayed inside the house, writing letters to family in Europe. Those close to her whispered that she cried often. Some believed she wanted to leave. Others believed she tried and failed. And then there was Tobias. No one knew where Tobias truly came from. Auction records listed him as a field hand from South Carolina. No family, no special notes. But people noticed him immediately. Tobias did not speak much. When he did, his voice was calm. Too calm. His eyes held something unsettling. Not fear. Not anger. Something deeper. Something watchful. He worked hard, never complained, never begged. Animals behaved strangely around him. Horses stopped when he passed. Dogs went quiet. Even snakes seemed to avoid his path. The other enslaved workers whispered that Tobias knew things. Old things. Some said his mother had been born free. Others claimed he came from Africa itself. No one knew the truth. Vandermeer first noticed Tobias during a dinner party. Important guests had gathered at the plantation. Businessmen, politicians, men who mattered. Vandermeer liked to show off. He gave tours. He displayed his land, his crops, his workers. During the tour, one of the guests dropped his walking cane near the stables. Tobias stepped forward, picked it up, and handed it back. Their eyes met. For just a moment, Vandermeer felt something he had not felt in years. Unease. Later that evening, one of the guests laughed and said Tobias had looked at Vandermeer as if he were equal. The comment embarrassed him. Anger burned quietly behind his smile. That was when Vandermeer made his decision. He announced the punishment the next morning. Tobias would be placed inside the bullpen. He would remain there for 3 days. No food, no water. If he survived, he would earn his freedom. Everyone knew what it really was. A public execution. The workers were forced to watch as Tobias was led to the pen. The bulls roared and stamped. Dust rose into the air. The iron gate opened. Tobias did not resist. He stepped inside. The gate slammed shut, and for the first time in years, the bulls went silent. What happened inside that pen would never be fully explained. But when the gate opened 72 hours later, nothing in Valdosta would ever be the same again. And that is where our story truly begins. If you want part 2, say continue part 2 and I will carry the mystery deeper into the pen. Part 2. The silence that terrified them. Silence can be more frightening than violence. The men standing outside the bullpen that evening knew this instinctively. Moments earlier, the air had been filled with thunderous bellows and the sound of hooves slamming into wood and iron. Now there was nothing. No roar, no movement, just 6 massive bulls standing perfectly still, their eyes fixed on one man. Tobias. No one spoke. Even the breeze seemed to pause, as if the land itself was listening. Baron Wilhelm Vandermeer was the first to recover. He felt something cold crawl up his spine, something he did not recognize. Fear was not an emotion he allowed himself. Fear was for weaker men. And yet, as he watched his most dangerous animals behave like trained guards, his confidence began to crack. "What are you doing here?" Vandermeer demanded, his voice sharp. Tobias lowered his head respectfully. "Begging your pardon, sir. I heard the noise. I thought one of the horses might be in trouble." The bulls did not move. They did not look away. Their attention never left Tobias. Several of the guests exchanged uneasy glances. Colonel Hartley cleared his throat. "Those are remarkable animals, Vandermeer. I've never seen bulls behave like that." "Neither have I," Richard Brennan muttered. "And I've seen plenty." Vandermeer forced a laugh, though it sounded thin even to his own ears. "They are responding to movement, nothing more. Animals are simple creatures." As if to prove him wrong, Tobias shifted his weight slightly. The bulls adjusted instantly, mirroring his movement with calm precision. A few of the guests stepped back again, this time not from fear of the bulls, but from the man standing near them. "That one works for you?" Hartley asked. Vandermeer nodded slowly. Stable hand. Useful, but forgettable. The lie tasted bitter in his mouth. Tobias was not forgettable. Not anymore. Vandermeer felt the eyes of his guests on him. He had built his reputation on control, on dominance. And now, in front of men whose respect he valued, something was happening that he could not explain. "Enough of this," Vandermeer snapped. "Tobias, get back to your work." Tobias inclined his head once. "Yes, sir." He turned and walked away. The moment he took more than 10 steps from the pen, the bulls shifted. Not violently, not suddenly, but the tension returned to their bodies, like a storm cloud slowly rebuilding. One of them snorted. Another pawed the ground. The guests let out breaths they had not realized they were holding. "Well," Hartley said lightly, "that was unexpected." Vandermeer said nothing. That night, long after the guests had left and the candles had burned low, Vandermeer sat alone in his study. He poured himself another glass of brandy but did not drink it. His thoughts kept returning to the image of the bulls standing frozen, obedient, calm. Animals did not behave like that. Not without reason. He rang the bell for Dalton. The overseer arrived quickly, his posture stiff. "You sent for me, sir." Vandermeer gestured for him to sit. "Tell me about Tobias." Dalton hesitated. "He's quiet. Does his work. Keeps to himself. Nothing punishable." Vandermeer's eyes hardened. "I did not ask if he was punishable. I asked what you know." Dalton shifted uncomfortably. "Some of the workers talk about him being strange, about animals liking him too much. And you allowed this talk?" "I shut it down when I hear it." Vandermeer leaned forward. That man embarrassed me tonight. Not intentionally, but the result was the same. Dalton nodded. Understood. I want him watched, Vandermeer said. Closely. I want to know where he goes. Who he speaks to. What he does in those woods. Dalton hesitated again. Sir, he has not broken any rules. Vandermeer smiled thinly. Everyone breaks rules eventually. The next few days passed quietly on the surface. Tobias returned to his work as if nothing had happened. The bulls remained restless but manageable. The plantation resumed its routine. But something had shifted. The other enslaved workers noticed it first. Tobias was watched more closely now. Dalton lingered near the stables. Guards passed by more often. Conversations stopped when Tobias approached. Marcus the stable master noticed it too. Late one evening, as they brushed down the horses, Marcus spoke quietly. You made an impression the other night. Tobias did not look up. I did not mean to. Marcus studied him. Vandermeer does not like being surprised. No one does, Tobias replied. Marcus hesitated. You need to be careful. Men like him do not forget. Tobias paused, his hand resting on the horse's neck. I know. That calmness again. That certainty. It unsettled Marcus more than fear would have. The incident that sealed Tobias' fate came a week later. A young white farmhand named Eli had been assigned to assist with feeding the bulls. He was inexperienced and careless. As he approached the pen, one of the chains on the feed chute slipped loose. Eli panicked and reached inside to fix it. Goliath lunged. Eli screamed. The sound carried across the plantation. Workers froze. Guards ran. Dalton shouted orders. Tobias heard it from the stable. Without thinking, he ran. By the time Tobias reached the pen, Eli was on the ground, his leg trapped between iron bars, the bull roaring inches from his face. Dalton yelled for someone to get a rifle. There was no time. Tobias stepped forward. Dalton shouted at him to stop. Tobias ignored him. He raised his hand. Not dramatically. Not commanding. Just raised it. Goliath stopped. The bull lowered its head. Its breathing slowed. Tobias spoke softly. Words no one recognized. A rhythm. Older than English. The bull backed away. Tobias pulled Eli free. The man survived. Shaken. Broken leg. But alive. And everyone saw it. There was no laughing this time. No explanations. No comfort. Vandermeer arrived moments later and took in the scene. Tobias standing calmly. Goliath docile. Workers staring in awe and terror. That night, Vandermeer made his decision. Punishment would come, not because Tobias disobeyed orders, but because he showed power. And on Vandermeer's plantation, power belonged to one man alone. By morning, the order was given. Tobias would be placed in the bullpen. For 3 days. No food, no water. If he survived, he would be free. Everyone knew the truth. This was not mercy. It was meant to be an execution. And Tobias accepted it without protest. Because he knew something they did not. And the bulls did too. If you want part 3, where Tobias enters the pen and the real horror begins, say continue part 3. Part 3. The wager that should have killed him. There are moments when a single sentence changes the direction of a life. When Tobias said the words I accept, time itself seemed to hesitate. The men standing near the bullpen did not cheer or laugh. They did not nod in approval. They stood in silence, uneasy and unsettled, as if they had just watched a door open that should have remained closed forever. Baron Wilhelm Vandermeer stared at Tobias. For a brief instant something flickered across his face. Doubt, surprise, perhaps even fear. It vanished just as quickly. Excellent, Vandermeer said smoothly. We begin at dawn. The bulls remained quiet. Their massive bodies stood still, their dark eyes locked on Tobias, as if they understood the agreement that had just been made. No one there could explain it, but everyone felt it. The animals were listening. The guests returned to the house in near silence. The laughter from earlier in the evening was gone. Even Colonel Hartley avoided looking at Vandermeer. What had begun as entertainment had become something far more serious. Something ritual-like. Inside the main house, the women noticed the change immediately. The men drank their brandy more quickly. Conversations were forced and brief. One by one, excuses were made. Carriages were called. By the end of the night, the plantation was quiet again. But no one slept. Word spread quickly through the worker quarters. By midnight, nearly everyone on the plantation knew what had been decided. Tobias was to be locked in the bullpen. 3 days. No food, no water. Some refused to believe it. Others wept quietly. A few prayed. Marcus, the stable master, sat alone in the stable, his hands trembling as he cleaned equipment that did not need cleaning. When Tobias returned to the stables, Marcus stood up at once. "Is it true?" Marcus asked in a low voice. Tobias nodded. "They going to kill you?" Tobias met his eyes. "No, they think they are." Marcus swallowed hard. "You should run. Tonight, I can help you." Tobias shook his head. "If I run, they punish others. They always do." Marcus felt a surge of anger and helplessness. He wanted to shout. He wanted to strike something. Instead he asked the only question that mattered. "Do you believe you will survive?" Tobias was quiet for a long moment. Then he answered, "I believe I will not be alone." Marcus did not understand what that meant, and Tobias did not explain. Before dawn, guards came for Tobias. Dalton himself led them. Chains were not used. There was no need. Tobias walked calmly between them, his hands empty, his face composed. The plantation gathered near the bullpen. Vandermeer had ordered it. He wanted witnesses. He wanted fear to spread. Men, women and children stood together in silence as Tobias was brought forward. The bulls were already restless. Dust rose beneath their hooves. The iron gate stood open. Vandermeer addressed the crowd. "This man has claimed to possess unusual influence over animals. Today we will see the truth of it. If he survives 3 days in that pen, he will be granted his freedom. If not, then let this be a lesson in false pride." No one spoke. Vandermeer turned to Tobias. "Any last words?" Tobias looked at the crowd. His gaze passed over faces filled with fear and sorrow. He did not speak to them. He spoke to the land. "Take care of each other," he said quietly. Then he stepped into the pen. The gate slammed shut behind him. The sound echoed like a gunshot. At first nothing happened. The bulls stood still. 6 enormous bodies. 6 sets of eyes fixed on Tobias. He did not move. He did not raise his hands. He simply stood there breathing slowly. Minutes passed. Then something strange occurred. One of the bulls lowered its head. Another followed. Not in aggression, but in something that looked almost like recognition. The workers watching from behind the fence felt a chill run through them. Dalton shifted uneasily. Vandermeer frowned. By midday the sun was high. Heat pressed down on the pen. Tobias remained standing, moving only when necessary. The bulls circled him slowly, but never charged. By nightfall, something impossible became clear. Tobias was still alive. The second day dawned heavy with fog. Vandermeer came to the pen early. He expected to find a broken body. Instead he found Tobias sitting on the ground, his back against the fence, eyes closed. The bulls lay nearby, resting. Not one of them showed signs of agitation. Vandermeer felt anger boil inside him. This was not how it was supposed to go. No food was given, no water. By evening of the second day, the watchers noticed something else. The bulls began to follow Tobias. When he stood, they stood. When he walked, they moved with him. Not crowding, not threatening, guarding. People whispered. Some crossed themselves. Marcus watched from a distance, his heart pounding. He had never seen anything like it. The third day arrived. Vandermeer barely slept. He came to the pen before sunrise. He told himself Tobias would be dead by now. Human bodies could not endure this. But Tobias stood. When the gate was opened 72 hours later, the plantation held its breath. Tobias walked out, unharmed. Behind him, one by one, the bulls followed. They did not charge. They did not bellow. They walked calmly, obediently, like soldiers behind a commander. Vandermeer stepped back, his face pale. What he had unleashed could not be controlled. And this was only the beginning. If you want part 4, where the bulls refuse to leave Tobias and fear spreads across the county, say continue part 4. Part 4. When the bulls chose their master. Some fears do not announce themselves with screams. They arrive quietly. When Tobias stepped out of the bullpen alive, no one cheered. No one spoke. The crowd stood frozen as if the world had slipped slightly out of place. Men who had seen death before felt their stomachs tighten. Women covered their mouths. Children clung to one another. Behind Tobias, the bulls followed. Not all at once, not rushing. One by one they came through the open gate, their hoofs striking the dirt in slow steady rhythm. Titan first, then Goliath, then the others, 6 giants moving as if they shared one mind. Dalton reached for his rifle. Vandermeer lifted a hand sharply. No, the bulls stopped when Tobias stopped. They stood close to him, forming a loose circle, their massive bodies creating a wall of muscle and horn. No one had ever seen anything like it. Get them back in the pen, Vandermeer ordered, his voice tight. No one moved. The workers stared at the bulls. The guards stared at Tobias. The bulls stared at nothing except him. Dalton swallowed. Sir, they will not respond. Vandermeer felt a wave of heat rush through his chest. His authority had always been absolute. Orders were obeyed. Fear ensured it. But fear had no place here. Not with those animals. Tobias turned slowly to face Vandermeer. You gave your word, Tobias said calmly. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Several guests who had remained overnight watched from the edge of the yard. Colonel Hartley whispered to Fairfax, "This is wrong. This is deeply wrong." Vandermeer forced himself to speak. His reputation depended on it. "You have survived," Vandermeer said. "I will honor the wager." The words tasted like ash. "You are free." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Free. It was a word rarely spoken aloud in this place. Tobias did not smile. He only nodded once. But the bulls did not move. Dalton stepped forward cautiously. Easy now. Back to the pen. Goliath turned his head and snorted. Not aggressively, but firmly. Dalton stopped. Vandermeer felt panic stir beneath his anger. These animals were worth a fortune. They were symbols of his dominance. And now they stood aligned with a man he no longer owned. Get them away from him, Vandermeer shouted. No one dared. Tobias placed a hand gently against Titan's shoulder. The bull leaned into the touch. That small gesture broke something in Vandermeer. Take him away, Vandermeer barked. Get him off my land now. Tobias looked toward the trees at the edge of the plantation. He did not argue. He did not beg. He began to walk. The bulls followed. Gasps filled the air. Workers stepped aside as the procession passed. 6 enormous animals moving through the plantation yard with quiet purpose. They walked past the cotton fields. Past the stables. Past the cabins. No one tried to stop them. At the edge of the woods, Tobias paused. For a moment he turned back and looked at the people who had watched his life unfold in chains. His eyes were steady, not angry, not triumphant. Remember what you saw, he said. Then he stepped into the trees. The bulls followed. By nightfall, rumors had already spread beyond the plantation. Travelers spoke of it at taverns. Farmhands whispered about it in nearby towns. A freed man walking into the woods with 6 killer bulls at his side. Most laughed. By morning, no one was laughing. Farmers from neighboring properties began reporting strange sightings. Bulls standing calmly at fence lines. Bulls that did not charge. Bulls that watched. Then more came. 2 bulls wandered in from a nearby ranch. They crossed open land without resistance. They ignored feed, ignored water. They went straight to the woods. Within a week, 8 bulls stood near the plantation gates at dawn. Calm, waiting. Vandermeer watched from his veranda, his face pale. This is madness, he muttered. His wife Marguerite stood beside him. For the first time in years, she spoke plainly. You should have let him go quietly. Vandermeer did not answer. He began sleeping poorly. He dreamed of hoofs on wood. Of breathing behind him. Of eyes watching in the dark. The bulls no longer frightened him. What frightened him was what they represented. Word reached Valdosta, then Savannah. Men rode out to see for themselves. They stood at a distance and watched as more bulls appeared from neighboring lands. 14 by the end of the second week. 20 bulls. All calm, all silent, all waiting. And always, when Tobias appeared from the woods, they gathered around him. Children followed at a distance. Women whispered prayers. Preachers warned of witchcraft. Some said Tobias was blessed. Others said cursed. Vandermeer locked himself in his study. He sent letters north, to lawyers, to investors, to old contacts in Europe. He received no answers that helped. One night, a guard ran to the house shouting that the bulls were on the move. Vandermeer rushed to the window. The herd stood facing the house. They did not charge. They simply waited. The next morning, Vandermeer was found dead in his study. The door was locked from the inside. His face was frozen in terror. No wounds were found. That same night, Tobias disappeared. 20 bulls walked with him into the darkness. They were never seen again. And in southern Georgia, people still lower their voices when they speak of the man who walked free. Because some chains were never meant to hold what Tobias truly was. If you want part 5, where the legend spreads and darker truths begin to surface, say continue part 5. Part 5. The county that would not forget. Some stories refuse to stay buried. They spread through whispers, through frightened looks, through doors closed a little too quickly at night. By the time the sun rose over southern Georgia the morning after Baron Vandermeer was found dead, the truth no longer mattered. The story had already become something else. People said the bulls killed him. Others said they only watched. Some swore no animal ever entered the house, yet everyone agreed on one thing. Vandermeer died terrified. The plantation gates were sealed by noon. Local authorities arrived from Valdosta, along with a doctor and 2 deputies. They examined the study carefully. The door had been locked from the inside. The windows were shut. No weapon was found. No wounds marked Vandermeer's body. His heart, the doctor said, had simply stopped. But men do not die with faces twisted in terror from nothing. The deputies asked questions. They spoke to Dalton, to Marcus, to the house staff. Everyone told the same story. Tobias had left the plantation the night before. The bulls had gone with him. 20 bulls. The deputies exchanged glances. One of them laughed nervously and said it sounded like superstition. But he did not laugh for long. Outside the plantation, neighbors were already talking. Farmers reported their cattle restless. Dogs refused to leave porches. Horses would not enter certain trails near the woods. And then there were sightings. A hunter swore he saw a line of bulls standing motionless in a clearing at dawn. He said a man stood among them, his hand resting on the head of the largest beast. When the hunter tried to approach, the animals turned as one. Not threatening, just watching. The hunter ran. Within days, the story reached Savannah. Then Charleston. Newspapers printed cautious lines about unexplained events at a plantation near Valdosta. They avoided details. Editors knew their readers. Some things were better hinted at than described. Preachers spoke of judgment. Others spoke of curses. Marcus left the plantation 3 days after Vandermeer's burial. He packed his belongings quietly and did not tell anyone where he was going. Before leaving, he walked to the edge of the woods. He did not see Tobias. But he felt something watching. Dalton stayed. Someone had to manage what remained of the estate. Vandermeer's wife Marguerite left within a week. She returned to Europe and never spoke of Georgia again. The plantation slowly fell into decline. Workers were sold or transferred. Fields went untended. The bullpen stood empty and silent. But the woods did not forget. Travelers avoided the eastern trails. Locals warned strangers not to camp near the river at night. They said the ground there felt wrong. Heavy. Years passed. Children grew up hearing the story. Some claimed Tobias was a demon. Others said he was a protector. A few said he was both. What made the legend stronger was that no one ever saw the bulls again. No bodies. No tracks. No remains. 20 animals did not simply vanish. In 1852, a group of men formed a hunting party. They believed the story was nonsense. They wanted proof, or trophies. They went into the woods armed and confident. Only 3 returned. Those 3 refused to speak of what they had seen. One never spoke again at all. After that, no one went looking. The Civil War came and went. The land changed hands. Towns rose and fell. But the story remained. It shifted with time, but the core stayed the same. A man enslaved, a wager, a pen of death, and bulls that chose him. Some historians later tried to explain it. They spoke of animal behavior, of pheromones, of coincidence and fear, but none of them could explain Vandermeer's death, or the sudden gathering of bulls from miles away. And none could explain why animals near that land still behaved differently. Even now, old farmers say their cattle grow quiet when storms approach that area. Birds circle but do not land. Dogs whine and pull away. And sometimes, just before dawn, people claim they hear hooves moving slowly through the trees. Not running, walking, as if guided. There are those who believe Tobias was not supernatural at all. They say he understood something most men never learn. That fear is loud, calm is stronger. That animals respond to truth the way people often cannot. Others believe he carried something older. Something brought across the ocean. Something that remembered chains and answered them. No one knows. What is known is this. Vandermeer sought to display power. Tobias revealed it. And power does not always belong to the one who claims it. Sometimes it belongs to the one who understands it. The woods of southern Georgia remain quiet today. Peaceful, even. But locals still say there are places where the ground feels watched. Places where the air grows still. Places where bulls once followed a man into legend. And never came back. If you want part 6, where the story turns darker and the true nature of Tobias begins to surface through hidden records and forgotten witnesses, say continue part 6. Part 6. The pages that were never meant to be read. Some secrets survive not because they are protected, but because people are afraid to look at them. Nearly 10 years after Tobias vanished into the Georgia woods, a small wooden chest was discovered in the ruins of the Vandermeer plantation. The house had long since fallen into decay. Vines crept through broken windows. The grand columns cracked and leaned. Most of the furniture had been taken or destroyed. But the chest remained hidden beneath the floorboards of what had once been Vandermeer's study. It was found by a carpenter repairing the structure for a new owner who believed the land could be restored. Inside the chest were letters, journals, shipping records, and one thin leather-bound book that had no title. At first, the documents seemed unrelated to Tobias. They spoke of cattle purchases, European shipments, investments, but as historians later discovered, they revealed something far more disturbing. Vandermeer had known about Tobias long before the bullpen. One journal entry dated 5 years earlier described a purchase at the Savannah auction. Vandermeer wrote of a man who stood calmly while others trembled. A man whose eyes did not plead. He wrote that Tobias reminded him of someone he had met years earlier in West Africa. That detail alone raised questions. Vandermeer should not have been there. Another entry spoke of local folklore Vandermeer had encountered during his travels. Stories of men who walked among animals. Men who were not feared by beasts. Men believed to carry ancient bloodlines tied to land and spirit. Vandermeer dismissed these stories in writing. Yet he kept notes. He observed Tobias closely. He recorded changes in animal behavior. He wrote of nights when the stable grew unnaturally quiet. Of horses standing alert without reason. Of dogs refusing to bark. One entry chilled every historian who later read it. He wrote that Tobias reminded him of the cattle masters of Dahomey. Men rumored to command herds without rope or whip. Men said to speak in tones animals understood. Vandermeer ended the entry with a question. What if such power exists here? The leather-bound book offered more answers. It contained symbols, drawings, words written in multiple languages. Some were African, some were Latin, some were unknown. A scholar from Charleston later claimed the symbols matched markings found in Old West African spiritual texts. Practices focused on harmony rather than domination. Protection rather than control. The book made one thing clear. Tobias was not improvising. He was remembering. Another discovery came from an unexpected place. In 1861, during the early days of the Civil War, a Union officer stationed briefly in southern Georgia wrote in his personal diary about an old freedman named Marcus. The officer noted that Marcus spoke carefully but carried knowledge of local legends. Marcus told him a story. He said Tobias was born on the Middle Passage. Not on land, not claimed by any nation. He said the women who cared for him believed he carried protection spirits. That animals did not cry when he was near. That storms shifted away from the ship. Marcus claimed Tobias was raised by elders who taught him how to listen rather than command. Not control, listen. The officer dismissed most of it. But he wrote down one sentence Marcus insisted on repeating. Power taken by force always demands payment. Power carried in balance does not. That sentence matched a phrase written in the leather-bound book. As these discoveries slowly surfaced, the story of Tobias changed. He was no longer seen as a monster or a miracle. He became something more unsettling. A man who represented an older way of power. A way that slavery itself could not fully crush. Meanwhile, strange reports continued. In the 1870s, railroad workers near the old plantation site reported equipment failures without explanation. Horses refused to cross certain tracks. Bulls belonging to nearby ranches would sometimes gather at night and stand motionless until dawn. No one ever saw Tobias. But people felt watched. One former plantation worker left behind a recorded interview in the early 20th century. As a child, she had lived near the woods. She said her grandmother told her never to fear Tobias. She said Tobias kept something locked away. She said Vandermeer did not die because of bulls. She said he died because he finally understood who held power. That idea terrified people more than the supernatural. Because it suggested justice that did not need courts or violence. Only truth. Only fear. The last known document connected to Tobias appeared in 1893. A faded letter written by a traveling preacher described encountering a man in the woods of southern Georgia. A man walking with animals who did not flee. The preacher wrote that the man asked him one question. Do you believe freedom can be stolen? The preacher never answered. The man smiled sadly and walked away. That letter ended with a warning. Some chains remain even after they break. And some guardians remain even after history forgets them. By the end of the 19th century, the story of Tobias was no longer whispered only in Georgia. It had spread, changed, adapted, but the truth remained hidden in plain sight. Tobias was never meant to be explained. He was meant to be remembered. Not as a ghost, not as a beast master, but as proof that some forces cannot be owned, and that some debts always come due. If you want part 7, where the story takes a darker turn and the land itself begins to reveal consequences, say continue part 7. Part 7, when the land began to remember. Some places do not forget what was done upon them. Years passed, but the land around the old Vandermeer plantation did not heal the way other places did. Grass grew, trees spread, animals returned, yet something underneath remained disturbed, like a scar beneath the skin. People who bought nearby land soon learned this. Crops planted too close to the eastern woods failed without reason. Corn sprouted and withered overnight. Cotton grew twisted and thin. Wells dug near the old bullpen tasted bitter no matter how deep they went. Farmers blamed the soil at first. Then the weather. Then God. But older residents shook their heads and said the land was remembering. In 1878, a family named Caldwell purchased a section of the former plantation. They were practical people from North Carolina, not superstitious. They cleared fields and rebuilt fences. They ignored local warnings. On their first night, the cattle refused to enter the new pasture. They stood at the fence, breathing heavily, eyes wide, hoofs digging into the dirt as if something invisible blocked the way. No amount of force would move them. That night, the Caldwell children woke screaming. They all described the same dream. A line of bulls moving through fog. Slow, silent, endless, and a man walking among them. Mr. Caldwell laughed it off the next morning. Dreams meant nothing. Animals were stubborn. He believed work could fix anything. 2 weeks later, his best bull broke free and disappeared into the woods. It never returned. Similar stories followed. A preacher riding through the area claimed his horse collapsed near the old plantation road and refused to stand again. Hunters reported feeling watched. Dogs whimpered and hid beneath wagons. No one stayed long. The land changed owners again and again. Each time, hope arrived. Each time, it left quietly. By the 1880s, the woods had earned a new name. People called them the listening pines. They said sounds behaved strangely there. Voices seemed to travel farther. Footsteps echoed even when walking alone. Sometimes people swore they heard breathing that did not belong to them. Children were warned never to enter the trees. At the same time, another pattern emerged. Men who spoke proudly of slavery. Men who bragged about cruelty. Men who laughed at suffering. Those men often met strange ends near the land. A trader collapsed on the road without warning. A former overseer vanished while hunting. A politician who mocked the story of Tobias was thrown from his horse and killed after riding too close to the woods. None of these deaths were proven to be connected. But people noticed, and they learned to speak carefully. In 1891, a schoolteacher named Eleanor Finch arrived in Valdosta. She was educated and curious. She believed stories revealed truth even when facts failed. She began collecting local accounts. She spoke to farmers, to freed families, to old workers who remembered Vandermeer. What she found disturbed her. Every story differed in details, but they agreed on one thing. The land had chosen sides. Eleanor wrote that Tobias did not haunt the woods like a ghost. He guarded them. She recorded a conversation with an elderly woman who claimed her grandmother had known Tobias. The woman said Tobias promised the land would not forget pain, that it would answer cruelty in its own time. Eleanor asked if Tobias was still alive. The woman smiled sadly. Alive is not the right word, she said. In 1899, Eleanor visited the woods herself. She went alone. She later wrote that the air grew heavy the moment she crossed the tree line. Sound softened. Even her breathing seemed loud. She felt watched but not threatened. She said she smelled earth and animals and something older. At the deepest part of the woods, she found hoof prints. Not fresh, pressed deep into hardened ground as if the earth had softened for them once and then sealed again. She also found something else. A symbol carved into a tree. The same symbol that appeared in Vandermeer's hidden book. Protection, balance, witness. Eleanor left the woods shaken but unharmed. That night, she dreamed of Tobias. He did not speak. He only looked at her as the bulls stood around him, calm and unmoving. When she woke, she understood something. The story was not about revenge. It was about limits. In the early 20th century, industry began creeping closer. Railroads cut through land once avoided. Progress pressed forward, yet even progress hesitated near the listening pines. Tracks bent around the deepest woods. Surveyors changed routes without explanation. Accidents happened when they did not. One railroad foreman wrote in his report that the land resisted being shaped. No one questioned him. By the time Eleanor published her small book on local folklore, most dismissed it as regional myth. But her final line lingered. Some histories do not end. They wait, and the land waits longest of all. Even today, people avoid certain trails near Valdosta. Maps show roads that do not exist. Old fences lean away from the trees. And on quiet nights, when the air is still, some swear they hear hooves. Not running, walking, measured, patient, as if something is still standing watch. And as if something is still owed. If you want Part 8, where the final witnesses come forward and the truth about Tobias reaches its most terrifying clarity, say continue Part 8. Part 8. The ones who finally spoke. Every legend reaches a moment when silence breaks. It does not happen loudly. It happens through people who are old enough to stop being afraid. People who know they will not live long enough to face consequences. That moment came in 1912. A drought struck southern Georgia that summer. Crops failed, rivers thinned, wells dried until buckets scraped stone. Farmers grew desperate. When fear returns, memory follows. An elderly black man named Isaiah Booker walked into the Valdosta courthouse and asked to speak to a clerk. He carried a bundle of papers wrapped in cloth. His hands shook, but his voice did not. He said the papers belonged to his father. And his father had known Tobias. At first, officials dismissed him. But Isaiah refused to leave. He said the drought would not end until the land was heard. Those words unsettled the clerk enough to summon a local judge. Isaiah was given a small room and time to speak. What he revealed spread slowly at first, then faster than anyone expected. Isaiah said Tobias was not just a plantation worker. He was brought to Georgia because Vandermeer had heard rumors. Stories from the Caribbean. Stories of men who could quiet animals. Men who carried old knowledge. Vandermeer believed he could own that power. Isaiah said Tobias never claimed special ability. He said Tobias believed animals listened because they were not taught to lie. Fear confused them. Calm guided them. But there was more. According to Isaiah, Tobias carried a vow. Not a curse. A vow taught to him as a child. A vow that tied witness to land. Where suffering was denied, the land would remember. Where cruelty was displayed, it would respond. Isaiah said Tobias did not command the bulls. He asked them. That detail disturbed everyone who heard it. The papers Isaiah brought were journals written by his father, once a stable hand on the plantation. The handwriting was neat, careful. The words were precise. One entry described the third night Tobias spent in the bull pen. The bulls lay down around him. None slept. They stood again at dawn. Another entry described Vandermeer's final night. Tobias had not gone far. He stood in the woods. He did not enter the house. He did not need to. The bulls did not touch Vandermeer. They surrounded him. The journal said Vandermeer saw something in their eyes. Something that reflected his own actions back at him. He collapsed screaming. When Isaiah finished, the room was silent. The judge ordered the journals locked away. He said they were dangerous. Not because they were false. Because they might be true. Within weeks, the drought broke. Rain fell hard and sudden. Rivers swelled. Crops recovered just enough to survive. People noticed. And they remembered Isaiah. Others came forward. A woman from Savannah claimed her grandfather had been one of the hunting party that went into the woods years earlier. He returned changed. He said they found the bulls standing in a perfect circle. Inside the circle was Tobias. He was older. He had not aged like a normal man. Another man claimed his uncle saw Tobias during the war, guiding escaped families through the woods. Animals never disturbed them. Dogs refused to track them. Railroad workers spoke quietly of accidents that stopped the tracks from cutting too deeply into the land. One said he heard hooves the night before a fatal collapse. By now, Tobias was no longer just a legend. He was a presence. Newspapers avoided his name, but folklore books did not. Scholars argued whether Tobias was human, spirit, or symbol. But locals knew better. They knew he appeared when power went too far. In 1921, a timber company tried to clear the listening pines. They brought machines and men in confidence. On the first day, every mule refused to move. On the second day, equipment broke without cause. On the third day, a foreman went missing. The company left. No explanation was given. Children growing up near Valdosta began to play a game. They would walk near the tree line and dare each other to listen. Some said they heard breathing. Some said they heard hooves. Some said they felt calm. Safer than anywhere else. That confused the adults more than fear would have. Because fear could be controlled. Calm could not. By the 1930s, the Great Depression hit. People wandered. Some passed through the woods at night seeking shelter. A few claimed the animals guided them toward safety. Never toward the trees. Always away from harm. The story changed again. Tobias was no longer just a warning. He was a balance. And balance does not choose sides. It responds. Historians later tried to separate fact from myth. They failed. Too many accounts aligned. Too many patterns repeated. And the land remained untouched. Even now, deeds avoid the deepest woods. Roads curve. Maps fade. Because some places remember. And some vows do not end. They wait. If you are ready for part 9, where the modern world collides with the old vow and someone tries to break it, say continue part 9. Part 9. When the past was challenged. Every legend survives because no one dares to test it. Until someone does. In 1978, a development company from Atlanta decided the stories were nothing more than superstition. They saw cheap land, dense timber, and profit waiting to be claimed. The listening pines had remained untouched for over a century, and to men who believed only in numbers, that meant opportunity. The company was called Southern Frontier Development. Its president, a confident man named Harold Whitcomb, publicly laughed when locals warned him. He told reporters that fear was the most valuable resource in Georgia folklore and that he planned to turn it into luxury homes. Permits were filed. Surveyors were sent. Bulldozers arrived. The first sign of trouble came quietly. The survey markers placed along the tree line were moved overnight. Not knocked down. Not broken. Carefully relocated and stacked together in neat piles. Workers blamed vandals. The second sign was harder to explain. Compass needles spun wildly near the inner woods. Radios crackled with static even on clear days. Dogs brought in to patrol the site refused to leave their trucks. One jumped out and ran straight back down the road, never to be seen again. Still, Whitcomb pushed forward. On the morning clearing was set to begin, an elderly woman stood at the edge of the road holding a faded photograph. She told the foreman her grandfather had worked for Vandermeer. She told him the land did not forget. The foreman told her to move. That night, every piece of heavy equipment stalled at the same time. Engines locked, batteries drained, mechanics found nothing wrong. On the third day, they cut the first tree. The sound echoed farther than it should have. Men said the forest went silent afterward. No birds, no insects, no wind. Then the animals came, not all at once. First, deer stood watching from the edge of the clearing. Then wild cattle, not domesticated, not branded, bulls with heavy shoulders and calm eyes. They did not charge, they watched. Workers reported the feeling of being measured, judged. Whitcomb arrived the next morning furious. He ordered the clearing to continue. He told the crew that animals could be scared off. They could not. When machines moved forward, the animals stepped aside. When men approached on foot, the animals closed ranks. No aggression, just refusal. Then one worker disappeared. His name was Alan Price. He was 34, married, 2 children. His truck was found parked at the site with the door open. His lunch pail sat untouched on the seat. There were no tracks leading away. Search teams found something else. Deep impressions in the ground. Hoof prints arranged in a wide circle. Inside the circle, the earth was untouched. No blood, no signs of struggle. The sheriff closed the site temporarily. Whitcomb argued, threatened lawsuits. But within days, more reports came in. A security guard claimed he saw a man standing at the tree line at dusk. Tall, still, surrounded by animals that did not move. When the guard blinked, they were gone. Another worker said he dreamed of bulls walking through his house. They did not harm his family. They only stood and watched until he woke screaming. Then came the final warning. On a hot afternoon, Whitcomb himself walked into the clearing to prove there was nothing to fear. Witnesses said the animals parted for him. Calm, silent, he reached the center, and stopped. No one knows what he saw. They said his face drained of color. His hands began to shake. He fell to his knees. He was found hours later alive but broken. His eyes were open but unfocused. He never spoke again. Southern Frontier Development dissolved within 6 months. The land was quietly transferred to the state and labeled unsuitable for construction due to geological instability. No one argued. Years later, a graduate student studying regional folklore found something strange. Old plantation maps showed paths that no longer existed. Paths that curved around the listening pines instead of through them. The student also found a letter written in 1848. It was unsigned, addressed to no one. It said only, this. Some men believe power is taken. Some learn it is borrowed. And some learn it is witnessed. The student tried to publish the letter. The archive declined. By the late 20th century, the story of Tobias changed again. No longer just a figure of the past. Not just a legend. He became a test. A measure of how far someone was willing to go. Those who respected the land never saw him. Those who tried to dominate it sometimes did. And they never spoke of what they saw. In 1999, a group of teenagers camping illegally near the woods reported hearing hooves at night. They ran. One tripped and broke his leg. He said the animals did not chase him. They waited. And when help arrived, they were gone. The boy later said something that unsettled even skeptics. He said he felt protected. Not threatened. As if the land itself had decided he did not belong to those who would be punished. By now, historians agreed on one thing. Whatever happened in that pen in 1847 did not end there. It began something. A promise tied to cruelty. A balance enforced by memory. And in the final chapter, that balance would be tested one last time. Because some stories do not fade. They wait. If you are ready for part 10, the final chapter where the truth fully reveals itself and the legend of Tobias reaches its end, say continue part 10. Part 10. The Last Witness. Some stories are never truly finished. They linger in the air, in the trees, in the quiet spaces where humans rarely tread. Some stories wait for the right eyes, the right ears, to bear witness once more. The story of Tobias, the man who walked among bulls without fear, reached its final chapter one cold autumn evening in 2007. It began with a historian named Claire Thompson. Claire had spent years chasing the legend of Tobias. She had read every journal, interviewed descendants of those who had witnessed the events, and walked the lands surrounding the old Valdosta plantation. Nothing had prepared her for what she was about to see. Claire arrived at the edge of the listening pines just as the sun was setting. The air was thick with the smell of pine resin and damp earth. She had come alone, equipped with only a notebook, a flashlight, and a camera. Her colleagues had warned her not to go into the woods alone. They said she was chasing folklore. She knew better. She felt the story was alive. The first sign came quietly. The ground beneath her feet shifted. Not the crunch of fallen leaves. Not the soft snap of twigs. A heavy, deliberate rhythm, like footsteps of something enormous. Claire froze. Then she saw them. Bulls. 20 in total. They emerged from the shadows with a slow, measured pace. Their eyes glimmered in the fading light, not wild or aggressive, but focused, almost intelligent. They did not charge. They did not bellow. They simply watched. Claire's heart raced. She remembered every story she had read. She remembered the accounts of her grandfather, her father, her colleagues. This was the culmination of centuries of witness. The bulls were real. Tobias was real. And the stories had been true. From the edge of the trees, a figure appeared. He walked with a calm certainty that made the forest itself seem still. Claire could not see his face clearly at first. He wore simple clothing, nothing that marked him as extraordinary. But the bulls parted for him, creating a silent corridor. He walked slowly toward Claire, and with every step, the air seemed to grow heavier, charged with something unexplainable. Claire raised her camera, but her hands shook. She took a single photo, then lowered it. The man stopped a few feet away. She could finally see his eyes. They were old and deep, like he had seen centuries of cruelty and survival. Yet they carried no anger, only understanding. "You came to see," he said quietly. His voice was calm but echoed in the forest as if the trees themselves carried it. I wanted to understand," Claire stammered. He nodded slowly. "Understanding is different from possession. You cannot own what is balance. You can only witness it." Claire glanced at the bulls. They shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if confirming his words. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why survive when everyone expected you to die?" Tobias, for the first time in over a century, spoke of the past. "I did not survive for myself," he said. "I survived because balance demanded it." They needed to see what fear and cruelty truly cost. The bulls, they are witnesses, but they are also guardians. They respond to intent, to heart. I do not command them. I walk, and they follow. Claire swallowed hard. She realized the truth of the old journals, the stories of the vanished men, the warnings that had been ignored for centuries. Tobias was more than a man. He was a force tied to justice and memory, tied to the land itself. "Are you human?" Claire whispered. He smiled faintly. "I am as human as any who choose cruelty over understanding. But I am also more than the eyes that see only power. You have seen me. That is enough for now." A sudden wind rustled through the trees. The bulls lowered their heads, grazing lightly, calm and silent. Tobias took a step back, and Claire instinctively knew this encounter was ending. He was disappearing, not into shadows, but into history itself. Claire called out, "Will anyone else see you again?" Tobias turned briefly. "Only when the land remembers. Only when cruelty reaches too far. And only when balance is needed once more." He walked slowly into the darkness, the bulls silently following behind him. Their hooves made no sound on the forest floor. Within moments, they had vanished, leaving Claire alone with the whispering pines and the memory of something impossible yet undeniable. She returned home and developed the photograph she had taken. The image showed a blur, faint shapes among the trees, but the eyes of the bulls glimmered with awareness. The figure of Tobias was there, faint but present, a testament to a story that had endured centuries. From that day forward, Claire knew she would spend the rest of her life telling this story. She wrote articles, gave lectures, and shared the legend widely. Yet she never returned to the woods alone. She understood that some forces are not meant to be challenged. Some legends are not meant to be tamed. Tobias's story became more than folklore. It became a warning, a lesson, a whisper in the wind reminding all who would listen that cruelty does not go unnoticed. Power does not belong to those who abuse it. Balance will always be restored. The legend of Tobias and the 20 bulls lives on. In the shadows of Valdosta, in the whispers of the woods, in the careful eyes of those who watch and listen, it endures. The pen from 1847 no longer exists, but the memory of that night, the witness of the bulls, and the presence of Tobias is eternal. If you ever find yourself near the woods of Valdosta and you hear the quiet sound of hooves, do not be afraid. Tobias is not seeking vengeance. He is reminding us all of something we often forget, that power, cruelty, and fear are temporary, but understanding, patience, and respect endure. If you want more stories that blur the line between history and the unexplainable, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this story and leave a comment below about what you would do if you came face to face with Tobias. Share this video so others can witness the legend too. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. The story of Tobias has ended, for now. But the land remembers.